I thought we might just start. Maybe I should just give a quick lay of the land. What is Cawdor Public Art Projects? What's the exhibition? And then we can dive in. So, Cawdor Public Art Projects began in 1969, and it began with this extraordinary project that you see behind us when Christo and Jean-Claude came out to Sydney in 1969 after John had, I believe, met them the year prior in New York. And they wrapped 2.5 kilometres of the coastline with a million square feet of fabric. And it was truly one of the most extraordinary, one of the most ambitious public art projects realised anywhere in the world at that time. And that's something that really comes across when you see the way it was received with some of the materials that we've gathered downstairs in the box that's dedicated to it. So Cawdor Public Art Projects is born in 1969. This is before the Biennale of Sydney. It's the NGV has only just opened its St Kilda Road building in 1968. The University of Sydney's only launched the Power Institute in 1968, and it's that there are people out there that will trace the kind of story of contemporary art in Australia back to this moment. So it really is, it's a landmark. Since that time, since 1969, there have been 34 different projects that have been produced by Cawdor Public Art Projects, most of them here in Sydney, and this institution has a long and deep history of collaboration with Cawdor Public Art Projects. Something like 10 of them have involved the gallery in one way or another. But the projects have also travelled to Melbourne and to Brisbane as well. The other thing I wanted to say up front is just to recognise that this, in 1969, when Cawdor Art Projects begins, it's the first organisation of its type anywhere in the world, right? So it's before the Public Art Fund or Art Angel or all these other public art organisations that begin in the 70s and 80s and 90s. So the exhibition Making Art Public, which has been created by
what's this shit? But
yeah, but there was some discussion about the title.
I don't recognise that title.
Yeah. Well, tell them your title, Michael.
Oh, you mean, mate, what's this shit?
Yeah. So the exhibition is surveying the 34 projects realised to date, and the exhibition is the next project. It's project number 35. That's right. And it's an exhibition that's been derived from the archives of Cawdor Public Art Projects, but then also from the memories of people that saw them. So Michael made project number 24 in 2011. And I thought the first thing I wanted to ask was, how did you meet John?
He knocked on my front door. No, he knocked on the door at C&A's in Oxford Street back in 2001 when I was destroying all my worldly belongings. And I was happened to be there at 8 o'clock in the morning, and Carl, the security guard, was in the British Army. He didn't want to let him in, but I said, Carl, let him in, let's see what he's got to say. And John introduced himself, and we had a brief conversation, and I said, well, why don't you come back at lunchtime and see what's really going on? Because we weren't operational at 8 o'clock in the morning. We were running at shop times, so like 10 till 6, and late on a Thursday, I think it was. And anyway, so John came back, and we had a chat. He gave me some catalogues, which I had to destroy because they came into my possession. So, and then John said, well, why don't you come to Sydney? And it seemed like once I got a new passport and a new birth certificate, then that seemed like a really good idea. And we kind of began a conversation, really, and ever since then, really.
So that's where Acts of Kindness was born, really, in that first, I think we have a slide of it, actually.
Yeah, Acts of Kindness came about, actually, via Breakdown, because obviously when you end up with nothing, in a sense, then you start to think about what else there is. And obviously part of that is obviously humanity and compassion. Once you take everything else away, that's kind of what you're left with. And people were very kind, on the whole, people were very kind to me. Like, I destroyed 7,227 items at the age of 37, and some people were very skeptical about it. People were very angry about it. My parents worked their whole lives to have things and possess things, and they weren't angry about it. But it's just basically you put your life in front of complete strangers. I had like 50,000 people come to see it over 2 weeks. And you offer it up to people, and then people on a very open level start to talk to you about their own feelings of consumption and consumerism and their own feelings of identity and self. And that's what really made it a really amazing project, actually, for me. And of course, I came away, and then I started to think about how you could articulate the idea of kindness. And I did a project on the London Underground on the Central Line, where I asked people travelling public to send in their everyday acts of kindness, because one of the other things I'm interested in is the everyday. And so I did a similar kind of thing for Project 24, asking people to Sydney side to send in their stories of acts of kindness, and I drew the CBD, and we created a large jigsaw puzzle by the Cenotaph in Martin's Place.
Which we see on the
Yeah.
left-hand side of the screen.
Yeah, and then we had like 200 jigsaw puzzle pieces out within the CBD on lampposts and on sides of public buildings with people's stories. And so it's just that kind of idea of articulating the kind of things that people don't normally articulate.
Right.
They feel slightly uncomfortable about it for various reasons. I've spoken before about people feel like somehow we were kinder somewhere else, some other time, and so I just wanted to articulate that, really.
I mean, I've been thinking, actually over the last few days, as I've been thinking about this project, and then also the kind of evolution of the exhibition downstairs, and I feel there's kind of an interesting correlation between what we're doing here at the gallery and the connection between Breakdown, the project where you destroyed all of your belongings, and this project here. And insofar that Caldor public art projects are, they're unlike normal public artworks insofar that they are always temporary, right? So they're not made from steel or bronze or glass. They're not these kind of semi-permanent interventions into the world outside. They kind of invade for a period of time, sometimes a few days, sometimes a few months, and then they're destroyed, actually. And I remember looking at photographs of your Breakdown project, and before you started destroying everything, there was a cataloguing process, right? So there was this sense of, creating an archive in a way, which you did through drawings, and you methodically archived everything that you had.
I made a list of everything I owned, and which became an inventory in a way, and so people could also see that. I literally made a list, like a very forensic list of all my possessions at that juncture.
So that the connection that I've been making is between that and where we are with Caldor Public Art Projects, where we similarly.
I did offer John to destroy the archive, but he said no.
We're left with an archive at Caldor Public Art Projects that is, the kind of remnants of these grand projects, but then also in a way that connects to acts of kindness. It's the memories, right? It endures through the kind of the human interactions that took place around the artworks.
I became very interested after Breakdown. I became very interested in an artwork called Homage to New York by Jean Tinguely, and it's like a 27-minute auto-destructive, auto-creative sculpture that back in 1960, it kind of it performed or didn't perform for 27 minutes, and then it was no longer. And it's like it's like dematerialization of an artwork, and it's no longer. And so it's what happens in those 27 minutes is the most interesting thing, and then people's reminisces how people witnessed it, and then you see there's a radio segment where you can actually literally hear people pulling bits of the sculpture off and taking it away with them. And so I tried to recreate this documentary. I make a documentary about it and through people's recollections, and so it's partly like a memorial, an archive, and then obviously my job. I'm not a curator. I'm not an academic, so I mean I'm thinking about trying to make it a visual thing as much as I possibly can, given the material I've got, and so that's how I see it. As I can't recreate, the living sculptures. I can't recreate Henri Sala's The Last Resort, so I've just got to try to do it in a different way and make it interesting for even if people didn't know these projects ever existed.
One of the things that really lies at the core of your art practice is drawing, and I think that's been a really interesting part of the process as we work through the archives. What's been traded backwards and forwards between London and Sydney as we've developed all of the different ideas for the boxes, and how we go about reimagining or reincarnating these projects that aren't with us anymore has been through drawings that you've produced. So on screen we have this this incredible how do we describe it? It's a mind map in a sense of
very
the
similar
history.
kind of drawings. I used to make. I made this artwork called Scrappy Services back in 1990, and it's kind of similar to that in a way. It's like in a diary form, and and I thought if John said that we had that wall over there, and to think about what one could do about it. So I thought about it as like if John, it's like John's diary in a sense, and then. And I take elements from all the projects, and then obviously there's certain things that really pull out to me, like artist drawings that they show John at the beginning to maybe initiate an idea, or the instructions that people give John to, whether it's Vanessa Beecroft or Meralda.
So this is the drawing that you will all, of course, go straight downstairs after we finish this talk and see the exhibition. And this drawing greets you as you descend to lower level 2 of the gallery, and I mean in a sense it's an overture. You have all of the projects all at once at the beginning, and I mean maybe Michael, I could ask you just to speak a bit about the kind of concept for the show.
Obviously, when John called me up about a year and a half ago, he said that he wanted someone to deal with the 50th anniversary of the exhibition, and he thought it would be appropriate if they had an artist do it. And so John asked me to, and I said yes. And then obviously you have to start to unpack that. And so the first thing I did was obviously come to the archive here and look through the archive, and I spent about 10 days here taking notes and taking pictures and thinking about what I could do with the archive, and also looking down at the space downstairs. And John had seen an exhibition I had in Basel in 2016 where I had this exhibition called Market back in 1990, and it's full of market stalls, and people would have to navigate their way around the exhibition. So I think John really liked this idea of my show in Basel was called Out of Order, so it wasn't in chronological order. Everything was kind of mixed in and immersed together. And so I showed lots of different bodies of work, but mixed in together. And John liked that. And so John saw that as a kind of, maybe we could use that as a template. And then when I went to have a look at the space downstairs, I knew I wanted to make obstacles to get in people's way. I didn't know they're going to end up in 4x4 boxes, but it's a very similar kind of aesthetic. I've got some no-frills series of work which are in the gallery.
In the collection here, yeah. I mean, from the gallery side, one of the things that I think is really successful and one of the most compelling aspects of the exhibition is that, I mean, for those of you that come here regularly, you won't recognise the galleries downstairs. I mean, you may in fact get lost down there, as I did during install. So it is a labyrinthine installation. And the other thing that's interesting to note is that we haven't used any of the gallery walls. Right, so the exhibition has kind of, it's like this, it's kind of like an imposter in the space in a way. Like none of the actual walls of the gallery have been used for any part of the display. Instead, we have this series of oversized archive boxes, and each one demonstrates a very different approach to how to go about reimagining the
Yeah.
past projects. Some are quite archival. You know, the Christo
one or
Box one,
two,
for instance,
Christo,
is
Harold, Simon,
yeah.
Nom John Paik and Charlotte Moorman. So, they're more archival. Yeah.
And then some, like Gilbert and George in front of us, this is on the left. Is it on your left too? Yes. on the left we see Gilbert and George. Actually, they're here where we're all seated right now. 1973. I got that right? Yes, 1973. Performing the singing sculpture here in the gallery.
You're not suggesting we start dancing, are you?
We could.
Or maybe later on.
Yeah, all right. Yes.
And we'll bypass that.
But tell me what you've done with Gilbert and George.
Well,
here.
I mean, because I read about the headlines and they talked about them being like a musical box, so I like them as like they were like figurines in a sense, and they have very robotic movements. So I've put them inside the box. I like the idea that they're still in the box and they can't get out of the box, and they're kind of singing away. And obviously, underneath the arches is a song about down and outs, and obviously they have some kind of empathy for being outsiders in a sense. And they just recently left St Martin's School of Art, probably in '69 as well, along with Richard Long and people. And
yeah, I mean,
so
look,
it's
that's a good point. I mean, so in 1969, Gilbert and George, who are, you know, two of the most significant, influential artists working in London today, I think it's fair to say, they're at the very beginning of their career. So, you know, it's quite something for this institution and for Sydney that they were here at that moment in 1971. And one of the things that I really love about this box on the opposite side to where you see them, they're full figures there, there's a monitor. And in it you can put headphones on and you'll see footage of that performance back in 1971. And the thing that I love about it, someone that works here, is when you look at the audience is not artists and curators and members of the art world who were no doubt there and watching, but it's a diverse and broad public who were being brought into contact with what, you know, at the time was like truly, you know, leading edge, progressive, contemporary art at a time when, you know, many museums, this one included, didn't really have a natural place for that kind of art in their program. So it's had a really, you know, significant impact.
yeah, and people are mesmerised.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got a few projects I thought would be interesting to touch on, just to look at some different approaches that you've taken. So this one is one that I sadly missed because I wasn't in Sydney at the time, but this is Thomas Dayman, the German photographer, who's also part of the John Caldor family collection here at the gallery, who made a project,
25.
over to you.
25. Project after me.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, I think Thomas he didn't know what to do. He was just strolling down Martin's Place and he saw the CTA building and at the MLC Centre, and he went in there and you know, it's quite extra. I mean, in some respects, I mean, as far as the layout of the actual box is concerned, it kind of, you know, I just go with a building, really, the Harry Seidler building, and it's a circular kind of building. And Thomas, like, if you look at the archives, he just replicates the rooms one by one, and he's very fastidious about the way the bins look, about the way the bedding is, you know, everything's a kind of detail. So basically, every room you go into, 11, 13, 12, they're all exactly the same. The only difference is the actual the photographs on the wall and the view outside the window. So it's the idea of detail, but also repetition. And so in some respects, the layout of the building gives you the idea of the layout of the box, in a sense.
So this is everyone will be familiar with it. This is the mushroom-shaped building at Martin Place in front of the MLC Centre. And I think from chatting to John about it, I think one of the great challenges in working with Thomas was actually identifying a venue, identifying a site that he wanted to work with. And I mean, it's incredible the sort of patience that's involved in, you know, many site visits and looking, you know, a whole range of possibilities. And this building, I mean, I think it always puzzled me as a as a child as well. I never knew what went on inside that place. And so it's the Commercial Travellers Association. It's like it's a hotel, right? But a members hotel. It's actually a bar in there
Travelling
that's
South.
open to the public. We later discovered. And so this is where the project was, you know. So I mean, and it's an interesting comparison to the work behind us, where, you know, John approaches Christo. What you know? Let's do a project. What would you like to do? I'd like to wrap a coastline, you know, which, I mean, just, you know, the permissions and the logistics involved in even making that a possibility, kind of, well, the mind boggles. But then, you know, here we have what is like a private, you know, building that has its own kind of set of obstacles to creating an art project in there. So some of those kind of backstories that led to the creation of things are quite fascinating. So what we're looking at here on the right, so I know this is a slightly discombobulating image, but this is actually an aerial view of what you'll see downstairs. So this is Michael's representation of that hotel, room by room. All right. We have to talk about Puppy.
Let's talk about Puppy. Let's talk about love.
So what we have for Puppy, I mean, the other thing we haven't talked about is the fact that the boxes are all the same. Did you want to just...
Oh, yeah, they're all
Yeah.
4x4 boxes. So me being a socialist, then I decided that everybody should have the same size box. I don't want to turn up in an exhibition where someone's got a bigger box than me. So I thought I'd give everybody the same size box. And because every project has, as far as I'm concerned, the same value and worth, basically, to me.
Right.
And they have the same importance. Obviously, Christo Jean-Claude's box 1 is the most pivotal box in some respects, because that's that starts the journey, in a sense, and the journey on the floor of, you know, I create a pathway as well for people to find their way around the exhibition. So, yeah, Jeff Koons and obviously the West Highland Terrier, which he bases Puppy on, the 12-metre high puppy that was outside the MCA. So it's obviously hard to try and think about a way to convey Puppy, basically. So, yeah. Anyway, I try. I mean, they're plastic flowers. I think we wanted real flowers, fabric flowers. Sorry, not. But we wanted real flowers. But then Gandhi was worried that pests would be on the.
Well, no,
they would end up on the bank.
They
They would end up on the Picasso.
Yeah.
What it was about.
So each box has.
They would all head to the Picasso.
Of course, naturally. Each box has this completely standardized treatment. You know, sometimes Michael is like creatively kind of twisted that, as with the Koons and a couple
it's
of
like
others.
It's a square, isn't it?
Yeah,
so it's
exactly.
a square. It's a homage to a square. It's also, you know, in some respects you feel slightly sorry for the puppy because it feels slightly isolated within its, like on this little island surrounded by flowers. But you know, but Jeff talks about it as innocence and love, and people, you know, people just, it was the most, as far as you know, audience figures and stuff, it was the most successful project John's done.
Yeah, I mean, I remember seeing it when I was a student, and it was one of those works that just changed what you thought was possible for contemporary art, and who the audience could be as well. Well, maybe we can. The next slide that we have is another early. This is actually Project 2. So this is
and Christo is very pivotal in suggesting Harold Zaman. You know, Gilbert and George, Meralda. I mean, the early boxes are Jean-Claude and Christo's conversations with John, and I think that's an interesting point as far as word of mouth in the art world and recommendations. That's kind of how things operate to an extent. Is you know, people recommend somebody else, and then Harold's obviously an international art curator, probably the first of its type in a sense.
Absolutely. You know, and I think, I mean, as you mentioned, so Michael's just referring to the fact that it was Christo that introduces John to Harold Zaman, who we can see second figure from your left on the screen, speaking to, that's actually Tim Johnson on the far left. I think I've got that right. So introduced to him by Christo. And I think one of the things that comes across from looking at the show is that it's also a story of these kind of personal connections and friendships that evolved over this period of time. This one's also interesting because of course, it's about an engagement with Australian art. So Harold Zeman, who is, one of the, kind of key curatorial figures of the 20th century, actually is brought out. He's working on Documenta, a very important show in Germany at the time, and he's brought out by John to Australia to do this whirlwind tour of artist studios in Sydney and Melbourne and Adelaide. And he organises 2 shows, actually, in Australia at the time. We have the footprint, the layout for one of the shows on the floor of the box, and then there are a number of artworks that were actually in these shows back in... I'm getting terrible with these dates.
I always say 1973, but...
No. 71,
2 years
of course,
out.
71.
Okay, 2 years out. But anyway.
1971.
But I like to leave a well done, nice child here. I've got that slightly mixed up, but that's kind of the doormat outside the front door, and Log Dog, and yeah. I mean, what I really liked about that was the energy that was portrayed in it, and the amount of artists, and to an extent, the artists were slightly interchangeable. And it's just the energy that was brought to it, and
right.
Harold's, the amount of studio visits Harold made, and conversations, and I guess the legacy he wanted to leave behind, and the dialogue he had with these, very young artists at the time. I mean, I don't know what their impressions were of Harold, but
yeah.
No,
and I think it really. This project, as a curator, it really resonates with what you've done downstairs, because what was important about what Harold Zeman did with exhibition making was that he decided it didn't need to be about this kind of sequence of discrete, autonomous artworks that you would view and have this kind of quite didactic experience of. He wanted to create a total environment, and that's really what we've what you've attempted to do.
Yeah, and so I should have mentioned with Basel, it was called Out of Order because it wasn't in a chronological order, and so obviously the similar kind of thing downstairs. I wanted to mix all the projects up together in a sense, so there was no hierarchy or anything. So, yeah.
So I think I'm going to let you guys all go downstairs and experience this exhibition, but I just wanted to finish on a slightly sentimental note, because tonight's kind of our last hurrah.
Uh-oh.
Michael has made, this is I think your 4th or 5th visit over 18 months to work on this project. There's been, lots of phone calls and, late nights working on the project, not just speaking from the gallery side, but also from the 12 people that work with Kaldor Public Art Projects. And you leave tomorrow, so we are going to miss you terribly. And I just wanted to thank you and say what a pleasure and privilege it's been to work with you, Michael.
Thanks,
Thank
Nick.
you.
Thank you.